everybody. This is Judge Tammy Bernstein. I'm the Vice Chair of the Commission on Sentencing. I want to welcome everybody who's speaking. Do we have everybody in the gallery who's here for speaking in the public? Are they all hooked on?
We do, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to be, I guess, introducing everybody who's going to speak. I want to thank everybody on behalf of the Commission. I know before I start, generally speaking, we have our Executive Director, Mark Bergstrom, who does a little bit of an opening to introduce the subject matter, the kind of the confinements in terms of the time frame for speakers. And so at this point, I would ask if Executive Director Bergstrom would address the group. And then if there's any questions, I think people can unmute, or is there a hand raising? I'm on an iPad, so we'll see how that goes. Between all of us, someone let me know if there's any questions. At this point, Executive Director, if you want to give us a little intro.
Great. Thank you, Judge Bernstein, and good afternoon. This is the second hearing that the Commission has scheduled on proposed parole guidelines and recommitment ranges. These are the initial guidelines that the Commission has proposed. The guidelines are guided by statute, by legislation that mandates factors the Commission must consider. The Commission has worked for about a decade now with the Parole Board to try to take into account activities and factors that they take into account when considering parole, because although these are guidelines, they are advisory guidelines, and therefore the Parole Board retains discretion to make decisions outside of the guidelines and to use any kind of internal processes they wish to use. So the guidelines take into account a number of statutory factors, and they also, and one of those factors is that the Commission is required to use a validated risk assessment instrument from the Department of Corrections as part of the instrument. And so in looking at the parole guidelines that are proposed, there are two main factors. One is the risk assessment component, and the other is what we call readiness, trying to objectify in some ways information that's discussed and reviewed with members and with individuals that are pending for parole. And so the proposal before us will be considered by the Commission on Sentencing. They can decide to adopt and submit to the General Assembly, or they can decide to delay and make additional changes and perhaps hold additional public hearings. So that is a decision for the Commission to make. In addition to the parole guidelines, there are also recommitment ranges, recommendations for back time or consideration of additional time to be served for those who are revoked on a state parole. And as with the sentencing guidelines, the recommitment ranges are also advisory. So the Parole Board has to consider them once they're adopted, but the Parole Board has the discretion to make decisions on their own. And in both of these cases, the Parole Board has existing instruments in place. They have a decisional instrument for parole decision-making, and they have regulations that address recommitment ranges. So the Commission is trying to build on those kind of practices and make for a more transparent process, and this public hearing is part of that. The Commission held one previous public hearing on August 31st in coordination with the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. And so we were really pleased to have that a number of individuals from the DOC testified from 4 different facilities. And I think that was a really helpful public hearing. And so with that, I'll turn it back to the judge. Judge, as I understand it, we have a list of, I think, 8 people that have registered to testify. Ryan and Christy are sort of managing that list, and they will invite one person at a time to unmute their microphone so that they may speak after you call on them. I'd remind everyone that it's a 5-minute limit for testimony, although members may then engage in question and answer with the individual. And when we go through the list of individuals who have testified or registered to testify, Then I'll ask Ryan to check if there's any other individuals that wish to testify but had not registered to testify, and we'll pass on that information to you. So with that, thank you, Judge, and good afternoon.
All right, thank you. And in advance, I'll apologize if I mispronounce anybody's name. I'll do my best. And I have a list. My list indicates 7 people. This is the updated list, so if I'm missing somebody, let me know. But it looks like we begin with Nysa Taylor. I know she had submitted something in advance that the commission was able to review, but she's available first for her 5 minutes.
There we go. Can you all hear me okay?
We can.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Bernstein and commission members, Representative McClinnan, Judge Tucker. It's nice to see all your faces and to see you well. The ACLU of Pennsylvania urges the Pennsylvania Commission on Sentencing to reject the proposed parole recommitment ranges and in the alternative to postpone the vote until December 2020. I did submit written testimony last night, so I'm not going to go through all of that today. I am just going to focus on our biggest point of concern, which is the required minimum sentences for parole recommitment ranges for technical violations. The proposed state parole recommitment ranges creates this new set of required minimum incarceration sentences for technical parole violations. Implementation of this proposal will increase mass incarceration, exacerbate racial disparities, and cost the state millions of dollars. The proposed recommitment ranges create minimum sentences for second and subsequent technical violations of parole. So a technical violation of parole, I think all of you on board know this, but it simply means that someone has not committed a new crime, but has failed to comply with any one of the myriad conditions of parole. And these can include failure to participate in community service, failure to get prior written approval before leaving the judicial district, failure to notify your parole officer within 72 hours if you've lost your job or your home, entering bars, and violating curfew. These conditions, for the most part, disproportionately impact those who struggle with financial instability. The statute that governs the recommitment for technical violations of parole provides maximum penalties or statutory caps on the length of incarceration that a person may be forced to serve after a technical violation. The statute does not prescribe a required mandatory minimum. The commission, on its own initiative, added these required minimum penalties, not less than 6 months for the second violation and not less than 9 months for the third. Such mandatory penalties will increase Pennsylvania's mass incarceration crisis. And I remind you all again that Pennsylvania has the highest adult incarceration per capita rate in the Northeast, and parole revocations are a major driver of that rate. Pennsylvania has more people on parole than Chicago and Illinois combined. We are first in the nation when it comes to the total number of people on parole. According to a recent analysis by the Council for State Governments, 54%, so more than half of all new admissions to state prison are for supervision violations, and 25% of those admissions are for technical violations. The report goes on to state, on any given day in Pennsylvania, 7,443 people are incarcerated as a result of a supervision violation. At an annual cost to the state of $334 million, technical supervision violations account for $101 million of this total amount. Nor has this stopped during our COVID-19 crisis. When our correctional facilities have become viral hotspots, threatening the health of incarcerated people, correctional staff, and nearby communities, the rate of incarceration for people with technical violations has continued unabated. From March through July 2020, at the height of the pandemic, the parole board reincarcerated 1,278 people for technical violations of parole alone. In addition to being a driver of mass incarceration, parole determinations are also rife with racism. Multiple studies cited in my written testimony have shown consistent racial disparities in parole revocation outcomes. Though Pennsylvania failed to disclose the data on the racial breakdown of parole violation outcomes, Black people account for 10% of the state's population, but make up 47% of the state's prison population. To require minimum sentences for technical violations of parole will further exacerbate these racial disparities. Despite our state's mass incarceration crisis, despite our state's pending budget crisis, this commission, instead of taking the opportunity to move towards data-driven decarceration, chose again to propose a policy that will increase the number of people in our state prisons and exacerbate racial disparities. The other thing that I'm going to ask of this commission is to seriously consider conducting a racial impact study before implementing the proposed changes. Any reform to the criminal legal system should take into account the racial impact of these changes. At the last meeting, I heard many of you speak very eloquently about your concern related to the racial reckoning that's happening across the country, related to concerns about equity within the commission. And I urge you to consider taking leadership on this front and to really consider using this as an opportunity to look at the racial disparities that are embedded within our system and to conduct a racial impact study before moving forward with change. So for all of these reasons, we ask the commission to delay the vote, to take into account everything that you've heard. And the last thing I do want to say is I want to commend the commission for holding these hearings for directly impacted people. That is an incredibly important step forward. Taking their voices into account was a really impressive thing the commission did. So big thanks to you for that and for the care with which you consider all of our concerns. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Very eloquent. Does anybody have any questions or any comments based upon the testimony? I'm looking to see if there's anybody waving me around. Things are looking okay. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And I'm going to go ahead and call the next speaker at this point. And I have really small font. Cynthia Alvarado with Fight for Lifers is available for testifying.
So Judge, I'm not actually seeing Cynthia logged in, but if
Okay.
Cynthia, you're logged in under a different name, if you could just hit the raise hand button. And the same with the next person on the list, Nicholas Presley.
All right, well, I can go down the list, and then what I'll do is after we've had everybody testify, I'll revisit to see if they joined in. So
Okay.
The next individual I have then would be Jackie Johnson.
Okay,
Is Jackie available?
they are on the list, yes.
Okay, and then Jackie, you'll have 5 minutes to speak once we get you up first.
Hi, and good afternoon. So my name is Jackie Johnson. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I specialize specifically with working with people who are currently incarcerated or previously incarcerated. So really working with directly impacted people and looking at the impact of incarceration and parole and probation on mental health. So I do apologize, I didn't have anything written because I wasn't informed that I would have the opportunity to speak. But just a couple of notes of recognizing that incarceration itself is a traumatic experience and has a very direct impact on a person's mental health. And when we look particularly at people who have had experiences with being powerless through different adverse experiences, whether that was as a child or as an adult, that incarceration only exacerbates it. So when we look at parole and probation, that's just another arm of it. When we're looking at how people, when we look at the brain science and really look at the impact of traumatic stress on a person, and when a person's agency is taken from them, and as I said, really just it exacerbates. So excuse me, because I don't really have something prepared. But I think really just the concern is incarcerating people is not good for anyone in any way. It does not, in this situation, we're talking about technical violations. When there's a way to avoid people within community, it's always going to be the best approach, especially when we're looking at long-term mental health impact, not just for the individuals, but also for their families, and understanding the wide-reaching effect of it. So, I mean, I think that's pretty much what I would like to say about really understanding the mental health impacts and making sure that we have those resources for people. There are times as well, I've had personal experiences with individuals who have, you know, been reincarcerated over technical violations, and really understanding that some of the nuances with that, whether it's access, whether it's fear, whether it's just stress and anxiety and depression, that also plays a part. And even for us to be able to take a much closer look at what people need, and having more holistic approaches to support them so that they can succeed.
Judge, you are muted.
Well, I'm saying something really interesting. No, I wanted to say thank you so very much for your, it was good though, because my phone went off at the same time. But I find the brain science and the studies that are coming out, and trauma and the impact in the different locations of the brain. I think trauma therapy is something that is instrumental, but for the purposes of, I understand your points that you're raising for the purposes of what we're hearing today. Does anybody have any questions or comments based upon Ms. Johnson's testimony?
Ms. Johnson, Judge Walker, I just want to make sure I understood what you were alluding to. You're not saying that under no circumstances should anyone be incarcerated, are you?
No, no, that's not at all what I'm saying. So again, I apologize since I didn't have anything prepared to better articulate my thoughts and my professional opinion. So it has nothing to do with people not being incarcerated, but it does have a lot to do with how we are incarcerating people and the care that we're taking in making those decisions. You know, are there diversionary programs that are going to have long-term transformative impact, as well as with people who do have technical violations? Are there some mental impacts, mental health impacts, mental health and wellness interventions that can be done so that people are able to stay within the community, especially if they're not a physical harm to anyone?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
But did that clarify?
Absolutely, it did, yes.
It's a good question, Judge Tucker. I'm glad you asked that. Thank you. Is there anybody else who has any questions or comments for Ms. Johnson? All right, I'm not seeing any, so I think we can go ahead and move on to the next speaker. I have Douglas Reed listed next. Is Mr. Reed available?
Yes.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, welcome, Mr. Reed. Thank you so much. You have your 5 minutes. You can go ahead and speak.
Thank you. I'm actually here in regards to Black Men Heal. They'll actually speak a little bit later. But I just want to give you guys well, first of all, thank you for allowing me to speak. My background actually consists of, worked in a federal prison for 25 years, retired military, also have my own organization dealing with prison reform. So I wanted to kind of give you an enlightenment, kind of working both sides and seeing both sides, and actually the impact that it has when people are incarcerated and once they get out. One of the jobs that I had working as a CO at the Federal Bureau of Prisons in Fort Dix, probably one of the largest federal institutions in the United States, was I always ask the individual when I process them out of the institution, like, what are you going to do? Which in some responses I got, hey, my family's been with me this whole incarceration. They're here. They're able to help me get through this process. But then there was a question. I had individuals that would actually say, I'm scared. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't want to go back and repeat the same things that got me here. And one of those things that where that actually arose was the simple fact that they didn't have the adequate, I would say, care, or didn't have the adequate resources in regards to trauma and dealing with mental illness, that even before they got incarcerated, they weren't able to deal with it once they were incarcerated and then getting out, which actually resulted into maybe some technical difficulties, some issues they had in regards to parole. I actually had the opportunity to talk in CPAC 20 down in Philadelphia concerning the prison population and what we could do with. I was a panelist with actually Secretary Wetzel. And one of the things too that I was involved in a process called a prison simulation, what actually got an understanding as far as when somebody's incarcerated, some of the trauma that they have being released, and then have to go to their parole officer, have to go to the banks, get IDs, some of those types of things. So what I do with the organization with Black Men Heal, and actually going through the organization itself, is trying to enlighten you as far as the impact of that it has on an individual or individuals once they're incarcerated. I mean, I understand that even regard what Ms. Taylor said, that Pennsylvania having one of the highest rates in regards to penalties in regards to parole in the Northeast. So what I'm asking the board is really to go back and take everything, even from my personal experience. I don't come as a therapist, but I come with a man with, I would say, wisdom based on my age and the time I spent working in that time and environment, but to consider some of those things and what you can actually give individuals that's been incarcerated once they're released, whether we do something that's inside the institution in regards to mental health. And I know as far as working inside, some of those resources that we avail to individuals, because whether they're short on staff or you just don't have enough of those individuals working, can accommodate. Like I said, I worked in a large institution with over, I think at the time we had 5,000 inmates. You don't have enough adequate staff to fulfill the needs and have the resources for those individuals. But also, like I said, doing something inside to institute where there is some type of education in regards to mental health and trauma. And even once they get out, Black Men Heal could actually possibly provide, and I'll let Tasmin Sullivan talk about that once she's on there, but having those resources to actually provide once somebody's released. Having an institute, one thing that we talked about too was the fact that with mass incarceration, I was at the height of mass incarceration when it was first instituted. Not first instituted, and we know, of course, the 1986 Anti-Drug Act, but 1992, there was 3.3 million people incarcerated. And of course, 2.3 once I retired in 2016, and a large disparity of African Americans being in that environment, that the impact that it had on them returning back to the community, as well as just the simple fact that what Black Men Heal offers is the sessions, the ability to talk to somebody, a person of color, where they can actually relate to them and actually to understand their position, how their mental health affects them. Like I said, I went through it personally myself on a couple of different aspects, even the aspect of military. And of course, we can talk about solitary confinement and the roles that it can play on your psyche. Being incarcerated within a cell 24 hours of the day and having 1 hour to go out for recreation. I dealt with those inmates in that atmosphere, where I dealt with them when I was working out in the yard as a CO, or then I was working inside of it, the segregation, where those individuals, we see the breakdown of somebody, I would say, the psychological aspect of it, where I seen it when they were acting differently being in the yard, but now confined to a cell 24 hours of the day for 30 days, whatever that time spent inside the segregation, the amount of toll that it takes on a person, where their thought process is. Now you see a change in individuals. And of course, sometimes they can accept that that role and that discipline for whatever reason. But then again, sometimes it actually break I say a man because I worked in a male institution, but you see the breakdown of that individual. So I just wanted to kind of enlighten the board in reference to my experience, what I did from what I did inside of working in an institution, the other avenues, the other network of people that I've dealt with regarding reentry, regarding parole, and actually now with Black Men Heal and offering insight as one of their board members and giving my insight to them to help and assist in any ways possible. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Reed, for your insight. It is a unique position you come from to be able to bring us that information from the perspectives that you served in through your career and through your military experience. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Reed or any comments based upon what he shared with us today? We're very grateful for your words. Thank you so very much for your time. I'm not seeing any questions. Oh, Judge Tucker, do you have, maybe? Yes? I don't know.
Oh, there we are. Okay, I
There we
couldn't
go.
unmute for some reason. Good afternoon, Mr. Reed.
Good
Mr.
afternoon,
Reed, from the perspective of the, well, from your perspective, what do you see as the purpose of this amendment that the commission seeks to do?
Actually, I'm thinking to account for all the testimonies to make a better decision in regards to the parole violations, in regards to the sentencing that you would impose on somebody that has violated their parole.
And do you have in mind a better way that the purpose of this can be done?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's individuals that are going to speak after me in regards to just the mental aspect, even in regards to Mrs. Johnson who spoke. I think mental health plays a vital aspect of that. So if any possible way that we can get or set up programs in regards to that healing, in regards to education of their mental illness, or in regards to any traumatization that they've had, I think it would actually be very powerful. But once again, dealing with with mental health and social workers and psychologists and therapists, based on, let's just be honest, money is usually a problem to accommodate for those types of programs. So, of course, if money is available, I'm pretty sure that the likelihood of getting things done and reducing these numbers of people returning back to prison can be done.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Mr. Reed. I'm going to go ahead and call the next individual for testimony. This is Donnell Drinks. Are they available?
I believe that's Mr. Drinks.
Yes, it is. How you doing, Judge
Oh,
Tucker?
hi, Mr. Drinks.
How you
Welcome,
doing?
and thank you for your taking the time to address us today, sir. You're available for your 5 minutes. You can go ahead and address the commission. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I submitted a written testimony as well, but I will deviate just a little bit, and I want y'all to know that I testify now as Donnell Drinks, but prior, for 27 and a half years, I was known to the DOC as CC 7423. So my perspective now, living on parole and having watched the parole process from the inside, is very unique. I don't think that we need to get away from what is the objective of a parole violation. I mean, a hit. There has to be an objective. Is the objective punishment? Is the objective another opportunity for rehabilitation? What is the objective? Because on the inside, that objective is not being met with the process of parole. You're allowing people to go back in there with no stipulation or no guidance, no structure, and it's further taking them away from a reintegration into society for a breaking of a rule in some instances. And as I think her name was Ms. Johnson spoke of, incarceration is necessary in some instances. I'll be the first to say that. But there are some situations where incarceration should be the least of results or options. There's a lot of people that need help. There are a lot of people that need rehabilitation programming. Sending people to institutions for breaking the rules or have adverse effects on what the overall objective should be. I don't know what your, when I say your, I'm speaking in reference to the commission, what the impression of the waiting to be parole process consists of. But people are allowed to sit there with no structure and do nothing. Whereas though on the street, they will have structure because they would have to maintain a livelihood. They will be working in a pattern, whether it's going to work, whether it's being responsible to their family and their children. You're allowing for the breaking of a rule to be removed from society and given the opportunity to do pretty much nothing in a lot of instances. And I'm not saying that as if it's putting the onus only on the DOC. Yes, it's on the individual as well. But we have to understand it has an adverse effect. We spoke about the traumatic effect it has on them. Let's talk about just the muscle memory of being in a pattern of doing something that was productive and now you're removed from that. Let's talk about the stigma that goes along with your family members that might think that you actually did something that was worthy of jail when it really wasn't that. It was just being a rule that put you back in an institution, and it can further separate you from your support system. What about the employment that is lost during that process? These are all things that have adverse effects on the same people that we are saying are supposed to be being helped by this process. That's what I would like the commission to look at, the overall picture. I would like them to look at the whole process of the parole waiting. You send people back and they get hits, whether it's a technical violation or they go see the parole, and they're sitting back for a cookie cutter reason of why they were denied parole. And they're not giving no standards of what they can do to correct it, to obtain it yet again. So with a little bit more transparency, that will help the process on the back end. But on the beginning part, I think we need to look at other alternatives than automatic incarceration. We talked about programming. We talked about therapy. All these things are better viable options initially than incarceration. I've been incarcerated for, like I just said, 27 and a half years. And I've been free for 2 years since July 20th. And I promise you, I've had way more rehabilitation and way more productive benefit on these last 2 years than I've gained on the inside because of the support system and the positivity that was afforded around me. And so I say to somebody that was already granted parole and maybe face some kind of violation, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some kind of penalty implied, even some structured or mandatory programming, to take them from a structure that is more conducive to their overall growth and put them back in an environment that will hinder them makes no sense. It has no benefit for society as a whole. It has no benefit for the individual. It has no benefit at all. And once again, I'll say this caveat. I'm not saying prison isn't warranted under certain extreme circumstances or certain circumstances. But for violations that pretty much we know is just rule breaking, that should be the last alternative. I don't want to be redundant. I don't want to repeat myself, but I just want to say that I deviated a little bit from my prepared statement because I rather speak more from the heart than what I wrote down, because I wrote it several times because I don't want to make it condensed in a 5-minute time frame. But the sentiments are the same. The sincerity is definitely there. Please reconsider and hold off on any voting until everything is considered. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Drinks. And you can tell that was heartfelt, so I appreciate your words. I think we all do. I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions of Mr. Drinks and his testimony at this time. Scrolling to see if I see any. Oh, I see DA Sunday has his hand up, so go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. Good afternoon, Mr. Drinks. How are you today?
I'm all right in yourself, sir.
I'm doing well, thank you. My name is Dave Sunday. I'm the District Attorney in York County. So I want to thank you for your testimony. I think that in particular, based on the time that you spent incarcerated, I mean, your opinion and experiences are very important. And a couple of things I wrote down while you were testifying. One of them is you noted that people are allowed to sit around with no structure, right? And is that when they're, and I just want to clarify that, is that, I mean, obviously generally that will happen, but in particular, is that waiting for parole after you have already had your, after you've already been recommitted? Is that what you're saying, sir?
Well, yes. That's a twofold question. I mean, the way the process works, unfortunately, the DOC prioritize who they feel should receive programming. And it's usually those going up for parole the first time. So a lot of people aren't afforded programming until 6-month window before they are eligible, ready to get their parole packet together. So then you have this other segment, the long-termers, or you have the recommits that languish in a no man's zone because they're not priority to be in programming. So in turn, what do? Is it catch-22? You don't have enough time to get in none of the schooling programs, so they don't allow you to go to school. Then you can't get into a lot of maybe the prescriptive programming because you're not priority. So literally you're telling somebody that might have just come from a workforce of contributing to a family to sit around or go play recreational sports. That doesn't mean that person doesn't take the onus on themselves and might read or do something else and try to do some self-studies, but there is no prescriptive opportunities for them in most cases.
Okay. No, I really appreciate that. You know, another comment you made was, and I hope you don't mind, I just have a couple questions here.
No, that's okay. I'm here for that.
Based on your testimony. You know, you referenced breaking a rule and then being removed from society. You know, in a lot of the interactions I have generally with the community, you know, all across the spectrum, right? People will say things like, well, if someone's not going to be recommitted, then they're way more likely to commit these offenses while they're on parole. And I've had other individuals say to me that you're wrong, that even with the knowledge that someone could be recommitted based on a technical violation, there are hurdles that people have a tough time overcoming to make sure that that doesn't happen. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit, what some of the hurdles are for someone who is freshly paroled and what their life is like in that time frame after being paroled?
Yes, I definitely can speak to that. The other gentleman, I believe his name was Doug, spoke to a simulation of what a lot of, I think with CPAC and even PAR went through these simulations of what we have to encounter on parole, whether it's obtaining your ID, finding employment, reunification with your family, finding some kind of continuity within yourself, your own coping mechanisms that you no longer are afforded. In jail, it might have been recreation of weightlifting. It costs out here to lift weights. You can't go to the gym. So now you're not afforded a coping mechanism that you normally have. Crowd adjustment. You know, now you might have somebody that came home and they got used to being around crowds, long noises, and then you remove them back. Now they got to go back through that reacclimation process yet again. But so I say that a lot of these hurdles, and the reason I spoke about the simulators are not accurate based on a lot of the people that were service providers were smiling because they recognized it was a game. Imagine sitting across from the table and you feel the vitriol from somebody because you were formerly incarcerated. You feel it. Know that you are going through the motions, but you already have a defeated mentality that you're not going to get the job based on your record once you get to that point or that question. So all these psychological issues, or knowing that you navigated a neighborhood and a community that no longer exists in the form that you remember. Imagine trying to get on a bus with money and not understanding you need a key card. These little things that we take for granted are hurdles and obstacles that hinder those freshly on parole. And that sometimes as soon as you get it figured out, to have the rug pulled from under you and you have to go through that process yet again, it's disheartening and it's fearful. And one of the things, the worst things that we don't want to develop is a segment of our population living in fear, additional fear. Fear, am I going to mess up? Fear, can I get reacclimated? Fear, am I going to go back? that takes and hinders you from the opportunity to grow and be productive.
Well, I mean, that was very helpful. I really appreciate that heartfelt testimony. I thought that, I mean, at least for me, you know, not many people have the experience that you had and can speak to it from that place, right? I mean, I was in the Navy for 4 years, and I remember when I got out of the Navy, I was like, oh man, the whole world's changed in 4 years.
Yes, yes.
I mean, you know, and I just think that's comically absurd to think that compared to, you know, like what you're experiencing after 27 years. And we all talk about reentry. And so it's just important to hear that impacts our processes and decision-making. So thank you, sir. I appreciate it tremendously.
Thank you for having me.
Right. Thank you so much, DA Sunday. Mr. Drinks, does anybody else have any comments or questions for Mr. Drink?
Judge Bernstein, I don't know if Representative McClinton earlier was going to comment.
Oh, there she is.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Judge. Yes, I had questions, but DA Sunday went probably down the similar line that I was thinking towards getting programming more available, because every time I visit one of the DOC institutions, so many folks are telling me that they have to wait so long to do the classes, the programs, the things that they would need to be eligible for parole, whether the first or the second time. And as a result of that wait, they end up in a jam. So I'm not going to rehash that, but thank you for testifying, Mr. Drinks. It's good to see you.
You don't have to rehash it, but can I elaborate on that point that you made? One of the things that I'm sure y'all have access to, pay attention to how many people may receive a denial of parole because they do not program compliant, or how many receive program upon completion of program. These two designations are pretty much sometimes based because they can't get into the programming, not of no fault of their own. And a lot of them maintain the request slips that they attempted to get in, and the jail tells them not now. So those are two distinctions that I would like highlighted.
Judge, if I may ask a question.
Sure.
First, Mr. Drinks, thanks very much. Really appreciate your comments. And we had a hearing last week at the Department of Corrections and had an opportunity to talk to some of the individuals afterwards. And they raised some of the same issues you did in terms of sort of dead time for people that are recommitted, and being able to get into the right type of programming that could really help to address a problem. So I've heard that, and I appreciate you elaborating on it. I wanted to ask about something different. When we've been working with the parole board on building guidelines and just sort of understanding the process, one of the things that they talk about is a process that they have in place prior to cases getting to the board, so that agents in the field and supervisors, district directors, things like that, people at that level have in effect a sanctioning grid to have rules in place about how to deal with non-compliance or technical violations before it goes to a revocation. And it seemed to me that, you know, looking at the details that they have, it made a lot of sense that that is exactly the right approach to try to deal with technical violations, not showing up, treatment issues, other things like that. And I guess I'm trying to understand, like from your perspective or those you've talked to, like where the breakdown is, because I think the commission has heard a lot of pushback about technical violators and they shouldn't go to prison. And I think there's things in statute right now that really promote the use of community alternatives to prison for technical violators. But it's not like that's the first instance, at least that's what I'm hearing, that there were efforts in the community to try to address the issue. And it got to a point where it had to go to the board for a revocation. And then what we're talking about in some of these cases is a second or third revocation. So I'm just trying to make sure I understand sort of just the backdrop, like is there something else that should be done with the agent or in the community around those kind of sanctioning grids or whatever to try to really take full advantage of that before cases even get to the board? Because I thought that was in place, but maybe it's not.
First, I'll be cautious not to speak in a monolithic perspective.
Yeah.
You know, each case is a little individualized. It's actually individualized. I'm sure there are a lot of instances where there were first, second, and third, and fourth chances. So we know their situations are different. But a lot of times, I believe it's just application and knowing that that is available to a lot of the agents. A lot of the agents I've encountered, or not me personally, not my agents at all, but agents I've encountered has a issue of a certain authority with their clients. And so a lot of times that threat is just made good on that it's there. You know, the fact that I told you I can do it, I have to show you I can do it now. And that maybe it's not even the second or third time, it's just the fact that I want to follow through on the threat that I made. That's a lot of the instances. And then another part of your question, I don't think necessarily that it's about not having some level of consequences for actions as much as it's mandatory consequences for actions. I think that's the breakdown that needs to be considered. Because when we start talking about mandatory, we get into an over policing, over incarceration state. And now you got client A being penalized in the same manner as client B with total different instances. You know, that's the part that I think there's not enough oversight on before it gets to the board. By the time it gets to the board, it is what it is. What is the oversight process, which I don't know, maybe you do. What is the oversight before that is even considered a option? These are things that needs to be reviewed and questioned before we start talking about mandatory timeframes.
Thank you. And just to your one point about, you know, sort of the flexibility that's needed to look at the individual case. You know, these guidelines or recommitment ranges that the commission is considering are advisory, but even built into that is the notion that there are aggravating and mitigating circumstances, that the board may identify factors that would, exactly to your point, explain why they don't have to do the sort of the typical thing. There might be an exception because of circumstances. And so I think that's a really good point. Thanks again for your testimony. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I think, Judge Tucker, did you have a question or a comment?
I had a comment. I just wanted to say, welcome, Mr. Drinks. You know, every time I listen to you, I'm just completely floored by the knowledge and the comment of things that you have to say and the teaching that you do. So I just want to tell you, keep up the good work, keep doing what you're doing. And it's much appreciated by a lot of people, more than you probably will ever know.
Thank
Keep
you,
it up.
Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor.
I think Judge Tucker probably speaks for a lot of us. I certainly feel, I have not heard you speak before, but it's very powerful and very informative. So thank you so very much. Any other questions? If anybody else sees anybody, I don't see any others. So thank you so very much for your time. And I on my list, I have one individual left to testify. It's Sandra Candelaria. Is she available? No.
Maybe. I promoted her to panelist. She should be showing up here. We seem to have lost her when I promoted her to panelist.
Judge, do you want to go back to the top of the list and then we'll
Sure.
see if we can find her the next time around?
Yeah, I don't know if either of these individuals joined us. We had Cynthia Alvarado.
I'm not seeing Cynthia.
And then Nicholas Presley.
And I'm not seeing Nicholas either.
All right. So maybe Ms. Candelaria will rejoin us.
Judge, if I may, we
Go ahead.
We do have one individual who joined us via phone, and therefore they can't indicate who they are. And with your permission, we could unmute them to see if they're one of those individuals that
Okay, sure.
scheduled to testify.
Okay, so it's somebody calling from a 717 number. I'm going to unmute them.
Okay.
I don't know who it is, but
All right, well, I'll ask and are they unmuted?
yeah, they should be able to unmute themselves now.
Okay, whoever is on the telephone, if you're able to hear us, if you could please just tell us your name and who you're associated with regard to testifying today. Oh, I think it's, do we hear anybody?
Sandra did just join back again.
Yeah, I saw that. She popped back in. So is she in the participant realm now?
Sandra, if you could unmute.
All right. Do we have Sandra Candelaria available?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, now we can.
Okay. Thank you for having this meeting, and thank you for allowing me to join. I'm speaking on behalf of my son, who's incarcerated right now, and at SCI Benner, and he's to be released next year, 2020, and he's accomplished many things since he's been incarcerated for 22 years now, and I just wanted to say that he's ready. He's ready for his release. He's accomplished, he has a certificate in paralegal, and he's also recently achieved his barber's license. And he's taken many other classes and courses, and I've made a compilation of all of his accomplishments and started to arrange a support system for him when he in the community when he leaves, so that he'll have a better chance of succeeding when he's released. And I think that when he's released and he is faced with certain types of situations, there should need to be support systems in place to help him, to support him, so that he will continue on his road to success. I've always been a very big supporter of his, encouraging him to educate himself, evolve, elevate his mind, and empower himself. And he's done that. And I want him to continue on that road once he's released. However, if he's going to be reinstituted into the system once he's released for an infraction that that maybe he wasn't prepared to deal with, that could be pretty detrimental to someone who's worked as hard as him. Yeah. And I just want to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. It was just so you know, the connection's not terrific. It's a little choppy, but I was able to understand. So hopefully everybody was. But what I was hearing is that your son, who's been incarcerated 22 years, is getting out soon, but took advantage of programming. And your concerns that you want us to understand are that there may be a lot of challenges for him coming out, and that you hope that we understand that in taking into consideration what it looks like for a violation.
Yes, that's correct.
Does anybody have any question or comments based on Ms. Candelaria's testimony today? I'm seeing if any hands are raised. I don't see any. It's wonderful to hear your support for your son, and we are very appreciative of you taking the time to share your experience and also give your input for us to consider while we're looking at these guidelines.
Thank you.
All right, there we go. I think she left. Does anybody have, are there any other individuals that were with the group who did not sign up who are interested in testifying at this time?
Yes, we have 2 people. We'll start with, there's a Bobby Harris. So let me promote. So Bobby is joining us.
Oh, there we go. So Bobby Harris, I'm waiting for you to pop up on the screen.
Nope, he's on there twice for some reason.
Oh, I see Mr. Harris. All right, Mr. Harris, when we get you up on the screen, if you could just, if you are, I don't know if you're a private citizen or if you're speaking on behalf of some organization, if you could just let us know as the commission, and then you're welcome to address us for the 5-minute period. Is he ready to go?
I don't know.
Mr.
Bobby,
Harris,
are you able to unmute?
Oh, he's gone.
Well, we can come back. There are 2 other people with their hand raised.
Okay, who's the next individual?
So the next one is Tasneem Soliman, and I apologize if I mispronounced.
All
I'm
right.
going to promote you to a panelist, so you should be able to share your video and unmute.
Hello.
Oh, hi. Can you just introduce yourself, and if you're a private citizen or with an organization, and you can address us for 5 minutes. Welcome, first of all, and thank you for taking the time to speak. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Tasneem Suleiman. I am a licensed professional counselor. In addition to, I am the founder and executive director of Blackman Hill, a nonprofit organization that creates the solution for men of color to be able to get the mental health access to wellness and rehabilitation, healing, trauma healing that they need. So I'm here on behalf of my organization, but also I feel as a private citizen as well. Thank you so much for giving me the time to speak. And in the interest of not trying to be redundant for some of the points that have already been made in regards to mental health and in regards to trauma and the effect that that has on people's psyche, I thought maybe I could shed a little bit of light on the how. Mr. Drinks talked, a lot of other people talked, and certain things came to mind for me. I also last week had the pleasure to be a part of the testimony, to witness listening to the inmates who advocated last week on behalf of themselves as far as harsher mandatory penalties for parole restrictions. And one of the things that came out of listening to the inmates, they talked a lot about they were asking and advocating for themselves for more programming for rehabilitation. And so I'm basically here to propose that, to advocate from the mental health perspective for, in regards, perhaps lesser mandatory penalties for technical violations, but to think about perhaps implementation of programming and resources that could actually help heal. One of the things the inmates talked about last week that was very striking was they asked a lot for programming that helps them change mindset. And that felt like very applicable to what I do as a therapist and what we do for mental health is helping to change mindset of when you think of parole violations or technical violations, that is people in era of organization. Like when you think of the skill sets that's needed to be able to follow rules, right? Especially like technical rules. You need things like organization, being able to emotionally regulate, memory, planning, prioritizing, task initiation, being able to have impulse control, emotional regulation, flexible thinking. Those are all considered under the category of executive functioning skills. And when you have issues such as The gentleman talked about the issues of the fears, the things that inmates go through when they get out of prison, such as health, economic disparities, worries about whether or not they will make this mistakes, worries about going out, like being able to be accepted by society, being able to reunify with your family and being a purposeful member or part of your family or of society. When you have an increase in mental health illness, issues such as depression and anxiety that are exacerbated by issues such as restriction, punishment, isolation, things like that, what happens is that directly affects your executive functioning skills. And perhaps I could help with illustration of how neurologically that does. So the way that the brain works is that when there is a constant trigger of trauma, which I think the rate is about 70 to 80% of inmates have experienced a trauma. 70 to 80% of people have experienced at least one trauma in their life. Some people have layers and layers of complex trauma. Inmates specifically, people have layers and layers of complex trauma, which actually then debilitates the executive functioning skills even more. But when you have that, there's the part of the brain. So like if you look at my fist and pretend that this is the brain, and my thumb would be the base part of the brain called the amygdala. This is the part of the brain that I call in therapy to help clients understand it. This is your trauma brain. This is your survival brain. It's needed to help us know to eat, to sleep, the things that we need to do to survive. Or if somebody comes in here right now and starts shooting, it helps us know we got to get up and run to try to save our lives. But the other part of the trauma brain is when we experience a horrible experience, we can get stuck here in the amygdala. That is the fight, flight, or freeze part of the brain. And the way that the brain works, so the amygdala is at the base, and then it's kind of folded over. The middle part would be your limbic system. This is the emotional regulation part of your brain. This is the part that is like has vulnerability, your ability to be loved, to give love, empathy, compassion. And then at the very top of the brain is something called the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex is where your executive functioning lies. That is where these things that I'm talking about, such as planning, prioritizing, task initiation, working memory, impulse control, flexible thinking, all of that lives primarily. You have to have a very clear mindset for cerebral cortex. The way the neurons of the brain work is that they actually go from the base, so from the amygdala up to the top. That's the way neuroplasticity works. They go from the base to the top. When people are stuck in their trauma level of their brain, they actually, the neurons, like they get stalled. So you're constantly living in a survival state of fight, flight, or freeze, which actually is going to greatly contribute to your inability actually to have a clear mindset, to have executive functioning skills, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to kind of like maybe give the how, because what Mr. Drinks was saying was those issues of fear and how they contribute to one's inability to grow. And I thought maybe I could shed some mindset on how that contributes to people's inability to grow. Also, I just want to say that the research is also very clearly demonstrating that restriction and punishment from a psychological perspective actually doesn't help rehabilitate. And to give some insight into the program that we've created, which I've been so proud of, is that our outcome and data that we're seeing in our program, two things. One, it's defying the odds of what people think, because we cater to Black men, men of color, and we are overwhelmed with the amount of men, and it's not mandatory. So the reason why our program is so amazing is that it's not mandatory for people to sign up for therapy, but we have men all over the country now, but primarily in Philadelphia where we're located, who are applying. We might have 20, 30 slots because of a lack of resources, but we might have 300 men who are applying, who are writing things such as, I'm trying to be a better husband, I'm trying to be a better father, I wanna learn how to heal from some of this trauma. I don't wanna keep drinking, because those are also things that people are doing coping skills wise, drugs and alcohol to numb issues such as trauma. Our program, we give them 8 free individual therapy sessions as well as weekly groups. What we're showing is that after the 8 free sessions, 60% of our men are actually continuing on with the therapy when it's not regulated, when it's not mandated. They're either paying for it out of their pockets, what they can afford, or we're matching them up in such a way that we've taken away the barriers that would prevent them from being able to contribute to continue to go forward. So we're getting numbers such as that. We're getting numbers such as we're showing that the men, after they complete the 8 sessions of trauma, they're also demonstrating that they're more likely to share to their experience with other men, which is also helping us get more men in that help heal. So I just wanted to come and advocate on behalf of, well, from the psychological perspective of how I feel like that contributes to the likelihood, actually. I think actually technical violations are more likely to occur, actually, from my perspective, with additional restrictions or isolation or mental health issues. And so just, again, to reiterate the proposal of possibly more programming, which is what I'm hearing a lot from the gentlemen and also the inmates, more programming that is more proactive than as opposed to reactive on the front end. So yeah, thank you so much for that time.
Judge, you need to unmute.
That's why I keep you around. Is it Ms. Sullivan? Is that correct?
Ms. Sullivan, yes, it is.
Okay, thank you so very much for your comments. I love the brain science. I'm fascinated. I'm always trying to go to seminars and read and learn as much as I can about it. But does anybody have any questions or comments based on her testimony? I'm trying to scroll through to see if any hands are up. I'm just going to stay unmuted. The only reason I'm muting is because my dogs may bark. But anyone else? Okay. I so appreciate your time. I believe we might have at least one other individual who wants to speak.
Judge, I think Mr. Harris, it looks like he's on, and if he could unmute, I think we can
Okay.
have testimony now.
And we do have one more person at least after Mr. Harris.
All right, so we'll address Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris, are you able to, can you speak so we can make sure we can hear you?
How y'all doing? Can y'all hear me?
There you go. Yep, you're up. Thank you for your time. If you could just, are you testifying as a private individual or are you with an organization?
I'm with an organization, Unincarcerated Minds, but also as a returning citizen that's directly impacted by the criminal justice system.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. And you have your 5 minutes to testify now. Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you all, and pardon me for those technical difficulties. That's something I'm still learning, to cope with, whatever. Something that Mr. Drink had mentioned, how it is on adjusting when you come out. I've actually served 29 years as a juvenile lifer inside of the prisons. And I've currently been home for 2 years and 7 months today. And I don't want to reiterate what everybody has already said, but it is a collage of a problem or an issue that come before every last one of you, Your Honors, in assessing the process when we're looking at, how we're dealing and confronting issues with individuals going up for parole or individuals re-entering back into the penitentiary. And one thing that I've seen, and it stuck out when Mr. Bertram had asked Donnell that question about other opportunities before going to the agents. This is an opportunity for every last one of you that oversee this committee to actually take a moment to assess what has actually just transpired. There are so many other options to consider or to assess while we're trying to come up with the best solution to address individuals, whether or not they are, reoffending or individuals coming up for parole. The biggest problem is not looking at the risk factor, but what is the need factor? What's needed to address this and put into place a policy that best serves the interests of the citizens out here and those that are inside the prison one day due to be released. So I just wanted to sit here and say, one thing I've learned about, I've worked in 2 jobs. I'm currently a supervisor at a homeless shelter. I worked for Just Leadership as a political community organizer and eventually started my own organization, Unincarcerated Minds, to provide services back to individuals in the community or returning to the community or already living in the community. A lot of people are starving. And what has been expressed throughout this, this hearing about the needs of the trauma, that's there. But each and every last one of you are in a position to say, let's pause and really look at and let's evaluate. Is that something we're considering when we're looking at people re-entering back into the prison system? Sure, when a person violates, we can send them back for 6 months. They want to violate again, we can sit back and say, okay, I'm going to give you 12 months. That doesn't answer the problem. Inside the penitentiary, there's a void. There's a void that's so closed off and isolated that a lot of us, and I include myself in this, we do not know how to communicate because we have not reached the level or the comfortability to open up to strange people that we have not become comfortable with. But if you actually allow a person to go through some real rehabilitative training inside of the prison, you allow them to go through some type of real reintegration back into community to express those human potentials we possess, then you open the door or the opportunity for real effective growth and development in our thoughts, actions, and deeds. This is what's needed, and this is why this committee should take more time opposed to rushing into and saying, I'm going to pass these policies and implement this. There's more work to be done. There's more areas to be addressed. So I hope that you all take this opportunity to really listen to what everyone had to say and share, because it's factual. Each and every last one of you, we hold the balance of life. Life means the quality that distinguishes a vital and functional being. Whether a person committed a crime doesn't exclude them from being rehabilitated. When you're looking at the conditions that led to that, in the court of law, as many of the judges here, you all know there's mitigating circumstances. Let's look at the mitigating circumstances and not just look at the risk assessment. Does this individual, he or she, present an opportunity to reoffend? But let's look at the needs assessment and say, what need to be addressed to best create a rehabilitated individual that express herself or himself in the best manner once they re-enter back into society. That's the good opportunity that every judge has to, make in his or her position, or even an elected official. Let's put that weight where we sit there and say, I'm going to weigh this individual in the manner of a civilized society that we live in, because that's what we're declaring. So I ask that you take a moment to pause and reflect and focus on what's rehabilitation, whether it's being presented, whether the needs assessment are being addressed on why an individual may offend, why an individual may, get high. More importantly, when we're looking inside the prisons, we're looking at over 65% of those inside of prison are in the restricted housing unit or isolation for disobeying a direct order. But when you have individuals sitting inside of those prisons, in solitary confinement with long sentences inside of the housing unit, that's isolation. There's trauma hitting that brain, as it was expressed from other individuals that testified, then being released and never receiving any treatment for it. We are essential individuals, those of us that have returned back to society, doing the work. And I must say, Donnell Drink, that's my mentor. When I'm stressed out, I call him. I call him Nell. Nell, I need to talk, whether it's a relationship issue or anything else, or even with my organization. But we know how to pull that resource from one another. And I need y'all to actually just take a little bit more time and don't rush to any decisions. Take everything in, please. That's all I wanted to say.
All right, thank you so very much for your testimony, Mr. Harris. And first of all, does anybody have any question or comment? I'm scrolling through to see if there's any hands up. Looking. All right. Yeah. And just a super brief comment that I want to make. What I have found in my time with the commission is that it is made up, although it varies because some people come in and go out through their terms. What I find as a constant is a group of individuals who are receptive, who want to effectuate positive change. We are giving of our time because it matters to us. And I can say that my belief is I have never seen this group rush through, that the reason that we are transparent, that the reason that we engage in these public hearings is to educate ourselves, to open up, to learn, to try to create the best things that we can do. Now, obviously, we're under mandate from the legislature, but we have really thoughtful, insightful individuals who, again, want to effectuate positive change. So we hear your requests, we hear the input from people, and we truly take that to heart when we, I think I can speak on behalf of the commission saying that we do that. And it is words like yours that help us to be informed as we move forward. So thank you. It's very impactful, certainly for me, and I'm sure the commission. Does anybody have any additional comments?
Judge Representative McClinton.
All right.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Mark. I just want to acknowledge the tremendous work that Bobby does with unincarcerated minds. He's partnered with my office on many different events, and he's just well known, not only in the community where I live and serve, but throughout the whole region, and I dare to say throughout the state, as being able to show what redemption looks like as a former juvenile lifer, but most importantly, the type of impact that people are able to positively make in a community that has so many needs when they have the opportunity to live and function as a free person. So thank you for testifying, Bobby. Haven't seen you face to face in a long time, but I was glad to see your hand up a little bit ago and to hear your testimony.
Thank you as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative. It's nice to see you as well. So I haven't seen her in a while. All right, anybody else, any questions? I'm scrolling through, none being seen. Ms. Bundro, do we have any other individuals to be testifying today?
Yes, we have Adrian Perry. So let me promote to panelist. Okay.
Okay.
And Adrian, you should be able to share your video. And
all right, Ms. Perry, if you unmute and speak, then you'll pop up on the screen.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, good afternoon. And I would just ask if you're able to just indicate if you're with an organization or if you're speaking as a private citizen, and then you can go ahead and take your 5 minutes to testify. And thank you so much for taking time to address the commission.
No problem. Well, I am partnered with Sankofa. I was a formerly incarcerated inmate. And one thing that I have found to be I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous, you gotta excuse me. I'm speaking from the woman's point of view. Of course, when you're incarcerated, you understand it. It's there for you to rehabilitate and put your best foot forward when you come out. I think mentally, we are not prepared. I greatly appreciate Ms. Jackie because it helped me prepare a little bit mentally, but once I got out, it's still a lot of emotional growth that I need as a returning citizen. While I was incarcerated, I took advantage of the peer specialist program because being an inmate and watching my fellow inmates, the hope was lost. Okay, they were had committed a crime or accused of committing a crime, and they're not knowing how to deal with just dealing with that. And then once they get out, how will society look at them? So it kind of puts them in a state of going back to what they were used to doing. And that's my fear. So when I became the peer specialist, I watched the women that were there, even though I did not have some of the same issues that they had. That was one key thing that I learned with them. They are mothers. They want to get back to their children. They may call home and their family is feeling a little upset with them, but they're not understanding exactly why. I feel like as them getting the help on the inside, I feel like the families need to be helped as well, because the person that's incarcerated is at a loss and the family is at a loss. So I feel like both situations need a place to go to help rebuild whatever was lost from why the person was incarcerated and the time they spent away. Then if they are, once they get to that point, but if they're in fear of, okay, if I fail, I may be put back into a place that broke my family in the first place. I feel like you're just resetting and starting that process all over again. And that's a lot of, that creates even more trauma. So you have the trauma of them being there, coming out, trying to figure out how they're going to deal with society. Then, okay, well, you have these rules, and we pray that we all strive to abide by them. But if they fall short, you're placing them back to go through that trauma over and over and over again. So I, as a returning citizen, at the time is taken to really look at these factors, because you have the rebuilding they have to do with their families. Okay, they have, how are they going to get back and get to good jobs to be able to take care of their families? You have to be in a right state of mind to be able to move forward. I am grateful that I have Sankofa to have, she encourages me on a daily. You have looking forward, but you need more, I feel like, for the women, more programs to help them rebuild themselves, to feel like they can do better after these issues. Because say if some of them are returning to drugs. It saddens me because some women have, once they got out, returned to that and have lost their lives to the reason why they was incarcerated. So I feel like the mental aspect really, really, really needs to be looked at before they are penalized for their wrongdoing. Once their mind is set straight, then I feel like they would do better. If you think differently, you'll be able to do better. And I have a saying of new day, different way. So we have to get them there first. And I am grateful that I am one of the people who have been able to get to Sankofa Healing Studio to help me. But I feel like more needs to be set for the women. And no offense, guys, but that's just my take on everything. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so very much. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Ms. Perry?
Judge, I do if no members do.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Ms. Perry, thanks very much for your comments. And I'd like to ask you a question about the parole process, if you don't mind, because you've successfully been through it. You're out in the community, and one of the things we're looking at, one of the proposals is just maybe formalizing some of the things the board already does, but particularly looking at that interview that the board members do with individuals that are eligible for parole, and trying to sort of figure out what's the purpose of having that interview, and what kind of information sort of links with people being successful, successfully back in the community. And so if you don't mind, I was just going to mention some of the things that we think are important from that interview, but I'd really be interested in what your experience was and what you think is important in terms of someone deciding if a person should be paroled or not. So, one of the things we look at is just information on programming that the person participated in, and comments from the Department of Corrections staff and others. But from the interview, there's 4 things that we were looking at. One is motivation for success. Another is acceptance of responsibility. The third is expressing insight or positive response to criminal behavior. And then the fourth is a stable release plan. And so I was just wondering if there's anything you wanted to comment on in terms of whether you think that makes sense in terms of things that the parole board should be considering when deciding whether to parole someone or not, or if there's other things we should be looking at.
I feel like every situation is different, but you said the 4th aspect, I think that's a part that
Ms. Perry, we lost you. I don't know if you're out of service or if you hit the mute. Ms. Bundro,
How they have
any
utilized them
issues?
once they got out, I think will be good.
I apologize, but we didn't hear almost any of that. I think you
Oh,
were
I'm
out of Zoom.
sorry. I'm sorry. You know, people start calling you on the phone.
Yeah, that's no problem. You had a
I
good
truly
chance to
apologize.
practice, so give it a second a shot.
Okay. So well, the part that stuck out to me the most was the fourth aspect you said, that you
Yeah.
look at making sure they have a nice plan.
Mhm.
I feel like that needs to be worked on inside and out.
Yeah.
So I feel like more programs have to be put in place for them, more options. So you might have programs, say if it's a single mother or a single woman. Most of the programs are set up, well, okay, if you have a child, but what about the person that does not have a child?
Yeah.
How are they going to be reintegrated into society? And I feel like if that part's taken away, because that's a worry in itself, homelessness. Okay, so now you got that stress. Then you have the stressor of, okay, well, I committed this crime. How am I going to find a job? Me, I was a city worker. Due to my circumstance, I am no longer a city worker, even after having 7 years with my company. That's a stressor, because if this is all prior to the person being incarcerated, that's all they knew, they'd be at a loss. You understand what I'm saying?
I do, and that makes a lot of sense. You know, both the department and the parole board talk a lot about reentry, and the idea that, you know, planning for reentry, like you said, is really important. And they talk about that starting at the point the person, you know, is committed to the institution. That you know, all of that time should be spent thinking about how do things work better when you're back out. Is there anything more that you think could be done to help with that planning part?
I feel like restoring the hope of that person. It starts there. Once they know that they can do better, trust me, they're not going to return back to what they used to be. When they come out, they're judged by their past. They're not judged by who they are. Okay, I spent 9 months in jail. This is my situation. I spent 9 months in jail. I came out and it was a shock. And all I could do was run to what I knew, which was Sankofa. I draw, and her one thing she would always tell us is, when you come here, be you. Show up and show out. That was all I knew, but that getting back was very difficult for me. It's a lot of trauma. So I had to really set my mind to, I can do it. And once that was restored, it was okay. I'm gonna take off running. I'm going to do everything I possibly can. And I feel like that part there, when they really emphasize the mental and restoring the self-esteem and having peer specialists, having support systems, I believe a lot of people would do so much better instead of being judged by what they have done in the past. Okay, they've done that. You know, they do not plan on returning to that. But that plan at the end, I feel like it should start while they're in there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not, because you have to go through the social worker. The social worker feel like putting you in a program. Then you got to go through, you know, if the programs are able to come in to help you rebuild yourself. Because if it's for you to sit down and get your thoughts together, why did you commit this crime, or what led you to doing what you've done to lead you here? It has to be a lot of group, has to be a lot of support, and it's for them and the family, because a lot of families are broken because the person is incarcerated. So now you got the person, okay, now they're coming back and they're dealing with, okay, when I went, I had a family. Now I'm out, I don't have a family. And the family is dealing with, okay, what if they go back? So you're starting that cycle all over again. So I don't think that you sending them back is really going to help them, because if you said, okay, they're here, they committed this crime, okay, we allowed them to come out. Okay, no, never mind, let's put them back. It's going to be an ongoing cycle. And I feel like it should be broken. This me. This is my first time ever being locked up. I don't plan on going back, but this is just my thoughts.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And Ms. Perry, if you're still there, I am, as many judges, we have a very finite period of time when somebody's in front of us, and I'm always trying to think of something that will stick, something that will have an impact. And that phrase that you use, new day, different way, is something in one way is simplistic in terms of a phrase, but is filled with a lot of meaning. So I wrote that down. I will be borrowing that from you to be sharing that with individuals in front of me, because I always try to instill in people a sense of hope going forward. So I appreciate that. Does anybody have anything else?
Much.
All right. And I'm looking forward.
Yes, let me, Ms. Perry, this is Judge Tucker. The words that you spoke and the way that you put them together really had an impact on me in terms of, from your perspective, the family and the family thoughts is something that candidly, in the 17 years of me being on the bench, I just never even thought of it from that perspective. So you have impacted me. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anybody else with any comments or statements? And do we have any other individuals who are waiting to testify?
We do. We have Deborah Carpenter. Sorry. She's had her hand up. I'll promote her. Panelist.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I believe that's the chairman of the Parole Board.
Ah.
With Ms. Carpenter's emails. The chairman had a little assistance from people at the board.
You'll need
Chairman,
to.
you're muted, so you'll have to unmute.
Thanks, Mark. And sorry, I didn't change my my ID from Deb Carpenter, although she really is the chairman of the board. I really would like to talk about the guidelines. When I came on the board 4 years ago, we were individually assigned SCIs. So coming from Pittsburgh, I had the 4 prisons in the Southwest. And other board members had the other SCIs. The board is made up of 9 board members, which are interchangeable after at least every 6 years or somewhere in between. So it's a rotating and people coming on and off the board. We have 16 hearing examiners, all with different views and beliefs, some conservative, some liberal, and those in between. The guidelines, we believe, is just another tool that we can use to bring more of, so when you have a board member who first comes on and does not have the experience of having an interview with an inmate, a burglary looks just as bad as a robbery. They're coming from the street. There is no guideline for them. It is just their gut and what their experience is in the street. I believe the guidelines, well, for us, we have an abundance of, we have the 16 officer hearing examiners and the 9 board members. And I have a release rate of anywhere from 40 to 70%. The guidelines would be just a tool, and it would bring that gap a little closer. It's not the Holy Grail. It is just something that we could use to help us make better and fairer decisions. It is a tool. With Zoom, we are no longer having to be assigned an SCI. So everybody will be able to interview wherever they're assigned. So it's no longer unfair for, let's just say, one board member who is liberal in one part of the state and who is releasing 7 out of 10 inmates, and another board member in another part of the state is only doing 4 out of 10. Now, of course, that also depends on the prison that you are assigned to. But I believe that there is room for guidelines as long as they are not mandatory. we are not confined to that, because just like Mr. Drink said, I don't think that every inmate should be painted with the same broad brush. But I think that we need some way of at least bringing those of us who are making decisions on someone's life. I think we need to bring that a little more together and be able to discuss it. The guidelines are it's just a tool. And we are desperately in need of as many tools as we can. Now, that is not the only tool that we have. We have, we interview or the opinion of 13 different DOC members. The district attorney, the judge weighs in on our decision, victims weigh in on our decision, and there is a pre-sentence, if you will, a background of that inmate. So this guideline, I believe, it needs to be tested. We'd like to work with it because, yeah, there are biases in everything. I mean, we have biases, but I would like a chance to at least work with those guidelines to see that if we can do something about bringing our decisions more in line with where they should be, which I believe it should be 65%. Thank you.
Any comments or questions based upon those statements?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Judge Tucker. How are you this afternoon?
Doing good.
Good. So I understand, in essence, you're looking for guidance by way of guidelines. Does it make a difference what those guidelines are?
Yes.
Okay. What would your suggestion, based on the experience that you've had, be to the commission in terms of the guidelines?
I like the guidelines as they are. I mean, I think that that's the starting point, and they need to be tweaked. I don't think that there's anything, I think there's been enough work done in these guidelines that if we're able to work with them, we will be able to tell you what's good, what's bad, and what's indifferent. This is the third state agency that I've run, 2 in federal law enforcement, and this is my first state. And I have seen ideas that look horrible on paper that turned out to be tremendous. In the reverse, I've seen things that look tremendous on paper and turned out horrible. You never know any of that until you put it into practice. We take a look at it. We look at where the biases are. Is this working for us? Is it in line with our decision making? But we're not going to be able to do that unless we have that time to work with the guidelines. Tossing it out without some kind of, I've heard everyone, and I appreciate it. But it's a hard thing to make a decision when you have someone sitting in front of you and you're making a determination on, are they going to reoffend, public safety, and reentry? And that's a heck of a decision to have to make. So I think it would behoove us to have these guidelines. I just see as a good thing. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did partially, but you've heard testimony today regarding the technical violations and a strong recommendation of reincarceration. What's your thought on that?
Judge, since I have been on, there has been redirection on technicals. When technicals come to the board, we review exactly what has been done. And when you have someone who is consistently breaking rules and regulations, someone who has gone through the programs that are available and has not taken advantage of that, sometimes the only thing are those technical violations. I disagree. I respect Mr. Drinks and what he's done since his release. tremendously. But I do disagree that it is just a haphazard tool that parole agents are using now. I agree that probably 6-7 years ago, that was it. The whole reason I took this job was because I did see exactly what Mr. Drink saw upon retirement from federal probation, that it was more of a just lock them up kind of thing. You're not doing what I want you to do, so I have the power to lock you up. I don't believe that's the case anymore. I think that we are, DOC has taken over. Christian Stevenson has done a tremendous job of reining in those agents who are just looking to throw people under the bus. The board is more cognizant of what has been done. And we are sending, I think we are getting now more requests for violation hearings because board members are not rubber stamping what an agent has brought to them. If we feel like they have not been given the shot that they needed to get, and we ask questions as to what have you done, and those questions don't really jive with what we're thinking, we throw it out, send the guy right back and say, look, this is what we want done. We want them to receive different programming. So we are listening to inmates when they come back, even in for the technicals. But generally, under Christian, that whole dynamic of technical violations has changed. By the time they get to the board, it's pretty much, we don't have really any other choice. The other part of it is, and I do agree, that there are better programs on the outside than there are inside. And so, but there aren't enough. There aren't enough of those programs. And we're not just holding people in incarceration for programs now. We have worked with Chris, and if there is a program that, let's just say they haven't gotten a program, but there is a program on the outside, and that inmate has done everything else that he or she needs to do, we're okay with paroling them to that program outside.
Thank you.
Any other questions or statements? Okay. All right. I'm going to be super brief, but I just wanted to comment on this. One of the things I think of with, trial court judges in Pennsylvania, there's 1,000+ of us. And so sometimes when I hear things and people say, well, these are advisory or these are guidelines, I think, well, for those who are educating themselves or following up, they know that, but I sometimes worry that not everybody is recognizing. But what I find comforting is because of the small size, the 9 board members and the 16 hearing officers, that it's a small enough group to where I feel everybody is able to be educated and informed. And because, like you said, you work in groups, the recognition that these are in fact guidelines is super comforting in knowing that everybody is aware of that when operating it as a tool. So just want to comment on that. Does anybody have anything else that they want to add in? And do we have any additional speakers?
No, I don't see anyone else with their hands raised.
All right, so Executive Director Bergstrom, I'm going to hand it over to you. Is there anything additional you want to state before we wrap up our public hearing for today?
Just a reminder to everyone of the next steps. So tomorrow morning, the commission will have a policy meeting at 9 o'clock. And for 2 hours, the commission will discuss the 4 proposals that we've had public hearings on. I think staff is pretty well prepared to present any kind of recommendations or suggestions regarding the sentencing related ones, so sentencing and resentencing guidelines, because we had those hearings several weeks ago. We'll be trying to provide you with some of the feedback that we've received last week and again today on the parole and recommitment guidelines. And then, so we'll discuss that during that policy meeting from 9 to 11, which is open to the public, available through Zoom. And then the commission's formal quarterly meeting is at 11 o'clock. And agenda items include the the review of these 4 proposals. So if the commission would decide to move on one or any or all of the proposals, the commission would move to adopt the draft or any revisions to the draft, and then that would be submitted to the General Assembly, and there would be a 90-day review process. And if not rejected by the General Assembly, it would take effect at the conclusion of that 90-day period. So the way we have the most of these recommendations, at least the sentencing and resentencing recommendations set up, is that they would take effect January 1st of next year for offenses committed on or after that day. They're prospective guidelines, and they're advisory guidelines. On the parole side, we had talked about the, I think we had set the date for July 1st of next year if they were in effect adopted and passed through the review from the General Assembly. Some of the discussions I've had with the chairman and with the board is exactly what the chairman talked about during his comments, which is I think the board would appreciate an opportunity to sort of work with these, sort of pilot them, and that would also provide an opportunity to develop the reporting mechanism, the sort of the IT side of this, where we build in an information exchange so that all of that information is available electronically to the board and to the commission. And so with that in mind, there may be a benefit of thinking about, even if they were adopted, putting off the effective date maybe until January of the following year, but spending the year working through piloting, doing a lot of work with the board on that. But if the commission thought there was more work or more review that was necessary, staff could work on that and provide revisions during the December meeting, which could then be reviewed and go to the public hearing and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of options on the table. And let me just put one final comment out there, and that is on the parole issues, keeping in mind there's 2 separate proposals. You know, one is about parole guidelines, and although we've received some comment on that, I think a lot more comments that we've received were concerns about the recommitment ranges, and particularly about technical violations and recommitment ranges. So the commission, you know, has the discretion to do what it wishes, but we'll have the opportunity tomorrow morning to discuss it. And then if the commission wants to take action, can do so during the quarterly meeting starting at 11 o'clock. And if any of the matters are delayed or that more work is required, staff can prepare additional proposals for consideration at the December meeting and then move on from there. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to go through the process. Turn it back to the judge to conclude the hearing.
All right, thank you for everybody's input and time today. It's nice to see the commission members here. And I guess we'll sign out. And for those of you who are going to be at the meeting tomorrow, we'll see you in there at 9 a.m. I'm assuming that link has been emailed or will be emailed to all of us. So, all right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Judge. It's good to see you
Thank you.
too.
I know, I miss seeing you. Take care. Bye-bye.